The text message came 3 hours before the wedding. Iris Sterling's phone lit up on the vanity while she was zipping herself into a champagne-colored bridesmaid dress. The mirror showed a woman with flawless makeup, collarbones dusted with shimmer powder, looking every bit the polished, appropriate guest about to witness her best friend's happiest day. The message was one line, from an unknown number. Asterisk Mrs. Whitmore, your husband is getting married today. At the Ritz-Carlton. To someone else, asterisk. She stared at the screen for 5 seconds, then set the phone down and finished adjusting the satin ribbon at her waist. Another bridesmaid leaned through the doorway. Iris, come on. The cars are leaving. Coming. Her voice came out so steady it felt like it belonged to someone else. Between the dressing room and the parking garage, she checked the message 4 more times. Each time, the words sat there unchanged, flat and sharp as a scalpel left on a tray. She saved the number, opened WeChat, searched it. The profile picture was a white ragdoll cat. The cover photo was a beach sunset. No visible posts. She remembered, then, that 3 days ago Julian Whitmore had told her he needed to fly to Shanghai for a project. He'd even arranged a car to take her to her best friend Sophie's house for the weekend. Asterisk, you'll be bored here by yourself. Go stay with Sophie for a couple of days. Asterisk. He'd been standing in the entryway, fixing his tie. He'd pulled her jacket off the hook, folded it neatly, set it beside her suitcase, so she wouldn't forget it when she left. The gesture was so seamless in its thoughtfulness. Sophie Lynn, her best friend. Iris parked at the Ritz-Carlton still wearing the champagne bridesmaid dress, still balancing on 3-inch heels, still holding the bouquet she was supposed to hand to the real bride. Sophie had told her the venue had the flowers covered. This one was just for photos. The lobby had signage. A pink and white balloon arch read, Julian and Sophie. She stood beneath it and looked down at her phone. Sophie's last message had come through the night before. Asterisk, Iris. You have to get here early tomorrow. I'm so nervous, I can't breathe. Asterisk. The voice note was sweet enough to frost a wedding cake. At the entrance, the woman working the guest table smiled. Are you at the groom's side or the bride's? Bride's. Iris met her eyes. I'm her best friend. She signed the book. The woman handed her a pink rose pin. Iris fastened it to her dress, where it blended perfectly with the champagne silk. The ballroom was on the top floor. Crystal chandeliers dropped 3 stories from the ceiling, flooding the space with light until it looked like a glass palace. Most of the 200 guests were already seated, dressed in dark suits and jewel-toned gowns, their voices rising in the low, warm hum of people who had no idea what was about to happen. Iris walked in. Almost no one noticed. She chose a table near the back and set the bouquet down. On the stage, the wedding coordinator was running through final checks with the officiant. The screen behind them cycled through engagement photos. Julian in a black suit, Sophie in a white gown with a train that pooled around her feet, the 2 of them standing nose to nose, laughing like every happy couple who had ever stood in front of a camera. She'd known Sophie for 12 years. She'd known Julian for 5. She'd been married to Julian for 3. The slideshow advanced. Sophie alone now, sitting by a window in a light gown, sunlight carving the delicate lines of her nose and chin. Iris looked at that face and remembered being 16, the 2 of them curled under a blanket reading romance novels they'd smuggled from Sophie's mother's nightstand. Sophie had announced back then that she was going to find a man exactly like the one on Iris's phone wallpaper. Like who? Iris had asked. Sophie had pointed at her screen, grinning. Him. The wallpaper had been Julian's profile. The lights dimmed. The wedding march swelled through the ballroom, and the officiant's voice rang out. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the groom. Julian emerged from a side door in the deep navy suit Iris had picked out for him. Last month, she'd told him the color brought out his eyes. He'd stood in front of the mirror for a long time, then said, Asterisk, okay. This one. Asterisk, she'd assumed he needed it for some important meeting. She'd pressed it herself and hung it at the front of his closet. He walked the length of the red carpet with an expression she'd never seen on him before, solemn, focused, almost boyishly nervous. Iris remembered him looking exactly like that the night he'd proposed. "Mrs. Whitmore." The voice came from behind her. She turned. A man in a charcoal gray suit had taken the empty seat beside her. Mid-30s, sharp jaw, dark eyes, a mouth that curved at the corner like he was already halfway through a private joke. She didn't recognize him, but she recognized the table number.
"Groom's VIP."
"You're in the wrong seat," she said, voice level. "This is the bride's side." "I know." He smiled. "I was looking for you." Iris studied his face. There was nothing flirtatious in his expression, nothing suggestive. Just a kind of knowing that made her skin prickle, like he'd read the whole script in advance and had shown up specifically to watch her react. The lights dropped another shade. A spotlight hit the back of the ballroom. Sophie appeared. She was wearing a dress Iris had never seen before. Not the simple satin gown they'd tried on together 3 months ago at the bridal boutique. This was something else entirely. Heavy embroidery, a cathedral train dripping with pearls and crystal beading, every step scattering light across the floor like shattered glass. Iris understood, suddenly, why Sophie had insisted on that shopping trip. Why she'd tried on the satin dress, said it wasn't quite right, said she'd keep looking. It hadn't been the wrong dress. It had just never been meant for Iris to see. Sophie walked down the aisle on her father's arm, gaze locked on Julian. Her eyes were wet. Her mouth was smiling. The expression was unguarded and raw in a way that couldn't be faked. She loved him. That much was real. Iris's fingers tightened around the bouquet. "You're not going to do anything?" The man beside her kept his voice low. "Storm the stage? Throw a drink? Seize the microphone?" She finally looked at him properly. The way he spoke was strange, like a spectator who already knew how the drama ended, mildly curious whether this performance would match the one he'd imagined. "Who are you?" she asked. "Yanbai. He said the name while watching her face, as if testing whether it would land. Different last name. Julian Whitmore's older half-brother. He's never met me. He knows I exist, but he doesn't know what I look like. Our father and I parted ways a long time ago." Iris's fingers went still. Julian had mentioned a half-brother exactly once. Some old family rupture, a name change, a door permanently closed. He'd never said the man's name. He'd certainly never said it was Yanbai. On the stage, the officiant asked, "Do you take this woman to be your wife?" Julian's voice carried through the ballroom without a tremor.
"이다."
The room erupted in applause. Iris waited for the pain to hit. She prepared herself for it, the kind of pain that starts somewhere behind the sternum and spreads outward like a crack through ice. But what she felt was something quieter. A tightness, like wearing a dress that had been altered just slightly wrong. Maybe because she'd known. Not about this. Not about the wedding. But about all the smaller things that had come before it. Julian working late every last Friday of the month, never saying where. The pinned chat at the top of his phone with no name attached. Message history wiped clean every time. The small, foreign objects that materialized in his suitcase after business trips. A hair clip, a silk scarf, a bag of candy from a brand she'd never seen before. She'd never asked. Not out of trust. Out of fear. She'd rather live with suspicion than confront a truth she couldn't unknow. But now the truth was standing on a stage in a suit she'd picked out, holding another woman's hands, reciting vows she'd heard before. "What do you want to do?" Yanbai asked. Iris turned to face him. The spotlight swept across the ballroom, briefly illuminating half his face. In the shifting light, his expression looked almost gentle. "You seem very interested in me," she said. "I am." He was direct about it, no pretense. His gaze dropped to the pink rose pinned to her dress. A woman who shows up to her husband's wedding to someone else, dressed as a bridesmaid, and sits through the ceremony like a spectator. "Iris, you seem dangerous." On stage, the ceremony continued. The rings, the kiss, the parents' toasts. Sophie's father broke down sobbing at the microphone, his hands shaking as he passed it to her mother. Sophie cried too, her careful eye makeup smudging at the corners. Julian turned to wipe her tears with his thumb, the motion so gentle it looked reverent. Iris watched this and felt a small, unexpected laugh rise in her throat. "What's funny?" Yanbai asked. "I am." She reached into her clutch. "Will you do something for me?" His eyebrow lifted. Iris pulled out her phone, opened the camera, aimed it at the stage. She pressed the shutter. The flash went off. It wasn't subtle. Several heads at nearby tables turned. She'd left the sound on. The shutter click cut through the ballroom like a small caliber gunshot. On stage, Julian's head snapped toward the sound. The lights were too dim for him to see faces. But Iris knew he could see the bouquet, champagne roses and eucalyptus, tied with a satin ribbon, identical to the one he'd given her the night he'd asked her to marry him. He remembered. They were both pretending he didn't. Iris tucked her phone away, stood, and picked up the bouquet. The people around her assumed she was heading up to give the bride her blessing. A few even shifted their chairs to clear a path. She didn't walk toward the stage. She walked toward the doors, her pace unhurried, 3-inch heels sinking silently into the carpet. The champagne silk of her dress swayed behind her like a slow-moving current. Behind her, the officiant's voice boomed. "And now, let's welcome the bride's best friend to the stage to offer her blessing." Applause. Someone called out, "Where's Iris?" No one answered. The corridor stretched long and golden under a row of wall sconces. She reached the elevator and pressed the call button. As the door slid open, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Yanbai stood at the far end of the hallway, backlit, his face unreadable. The doors started to close. Iris reached out and stopped them with her hand, her eyes on the dark figure at the other end of the corridor. "Mr. Fong, you offered to help." "I did." "Then tell Julian something for me." She stepped into the elevator. "He doesn't need to rush home after his business trip." "Because I—" The doors slid narrower. His silhouette shrank to a sliver. "I'm going on a very long trip of my own." The doors sealed shut. The floor numbers began their descent from 27. Iris leaned back against the elevator wall and looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were white around the bouquet stems. The satin ribbon had carved red lines into her skin. The pain came, finally. She didn't go home. Outside the Ritz-Carlton, she flagged a taxi and told the driver to take her to the airport. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, a woman in an evening gown, holding no luggage, heading to the airport at night. He didn't ask questions. He just turned up the heat. Iris sent a message to the other bridesmaid. Asterisk, not feeling well. Heading home. Tell Sophie I'm sorry. Asterisk. The reply came instantly. Asterisk, are you okay? Sophie was looking everywhere for you. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'm fine. Old health thing. Get some rest. Asterisk. She switched her phone off. Her reflection floated in the taxi window, makeup still intact, expression composed, nothing about her appearance suggesting her life had just detonated. She thought about what Yanbai had said. A woman who sits through her husband's wedding like a spectator. Spectator. That was accurate. Not because she was cold. Because she'd rehearsed the scene 100 times already. On every night Julian had worked late. In every moment he'd angled his phone away from her. Every time she'd caught a trace of perfume on his collar that wasn't hers. She'd just been too afraid to confirm it, too afraid to ask, too afraid to stop telling herself she was imagining things. But not knowing didn't mean not seeing. At the airport, she walked straight to a self-service kiosk and bought a ticket on the next flight out. The screen offered her Miami. Departure time 1:15 a.m. She had 2 hours. She left the bouquet on the back seat of the taxi. The driver leaned out his window, calling after her. Miss, your flowers. Keep them, she said without turning around. Security took a long look at her gown and her ID. The terminal was nearly empty. She found a seat in a quiet corner, pulled off her heels, and set her bare feet on the cold tile floor. Her phone was still off. She knew what was waiting for her when she turned it back on. Julian's missed calls. Sophie's frantic texts. The bridal party group chat exploding with speculation. All of it could wait. A television mounted overhead played a daytime talk show. A wife had caught her husband cheating. The host had seated them across from each other. Let's talk about what went wrong in your relationship. Iris watched the wife's face. The woman was crying hard, every expression wrenched outward like she was trying to physically expel something from her body. The husband's expression was subtler. He looked like a man who knew he'd done something wrong but also thought maybe his wife was overdoing it. Iris thought she should probably be crying too. But she couldn't. She just felt tired. A bone-deep exhaustion, like everything inside her had been scooped out and all that remained was a shell sitting in an airport chair. Maybe when she landed in Miami, in some anonymous hotel room where no one knew her name, she'd finally be able to cry. At 12:45, the gate agent called for boarding. She was the last passenger on the plane. The flight attendant took in her gown and handed her a blanket without being asked. "Ma'am, do you need anything?"
No, thank you.
The man in the seat beside her was scrolling through photos on his phone. The screen glow illuminated his face. Iris glanced over without meaning to. Pictures of a little girl, maybe 3 or 4, pigtails, missing 2 front teeth, grinning wide. He swiped to a photo of his wife. The woman wasn't conventionally beautiful, but her smile crinkled her eyes in a way that radiated warmth. Iris thought, suddenly, that Julian probably looked at Sophie that same way. That unguarded, overflowing tenderness that couldn't be performed or faked. The kind of tenderness that came from genuinely wanting to make someone happy. He'd just never looked at her like that. Once the plane leveled off, the attendants came through with drinks. Iris ordered hot water and wrapped her hands around the paper cup for warmth. Outside the window, the night was depthless black, broken only by the occasional blink of lights on the wing. She turned her phone back on. 37 missed calls. 28 from Julian. 9 from Sophie. Her messages were a flood. Sophie had sent the most, starting with "Where did you go?" escalating to "Why aren't you answering?" Then "Are you mad?" Then finally "I'm sorry." Iris didn't open any of them. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she hadn't called in a long time. She hesitated for 3 seconds, then dialed. It rang 5 times before a groggy male voice answered. "Who is this?" "Gabriel." "It's me." Silence. Then the sound of a chair being shoved back. Her older brother's voice snapped into full alertness. "Iris? What happened?" She took a breath. "I've made a decision. I'll come home." Home. He sounded like he was trying to catch up. "The marriage alliance." She said the words evenly. "The Fong family. The one you and Dad proposed." "I agree." The silence on the other end stretched so long, she thought he might have hung up. "Are you drunk?" Gabriel finally asked, his voice tight.
No.
"Where are you right now?" "On a plane. Heading to Miami." "Why Miami?"
She thought about it.
"Business." Gabriel clearly didn't believe her, but he didn't push. As the eldest son of the Sterling family, he understood when to ask and when to wait. He just said, "The Fong arrangement isn't small. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "I'll talk to Dad. Send me your hotel information when you land." "I don't need anyone to pick me up. I want a few days alone." "Then at least keep your phone on." His voice left no room for argument. "Last time I couldn't reach you, I almost had Julian's company torn apart." Iris went still. "Last time?" she asked. "When was that?" Another pause. Gabriel seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "We'll talk when you're back. Get some sleep on the flight. Don't overthink." He hung up. Iris stared at the call-ended screen, her brow furrowing. Last time I couldn't reach you. She couldn't remember any occasion, when she'd been unreachable. She was meticulous about keeping her family informed, always a text before a trip, always a check-in upon arrival. The only exception had been 3 years ago. Her honeymoon. The first month after marrying Julian. He'd taken her to a remote mountain town where cell service was nearly non-existent. She'd thought it was romantic at the time, a chance to disconnect. 3 days completely off the grid. When they'd returned, Gabriel had been furious. She'd assumed it was because she hadn't warned him in advance. But what if it wasn't that? Iris closed her eyes and leaned back against the headrest. At cruising altitude, the cabin lights were dimmed, most passengers asleep. She listened to the monotonous hum of the engines and tried to keep her thoughts from spiraling. Julian had said "I do" like he meant it. Not pressured. Not coerced. He'd wanted to marry Sophie. But he was already married to her. How was that legally possible? Bigamy was a felony. Julian was too careful to risk criminal charges. The only explanation was that his wedding to Sophie had no legal weight. No marriage license. A ceremony without paperwork. A performance.
But why?
If he wanted Sophie, he could have divorced her. She wasn't the kind of woman who would fight. He could have told her, and she would have signed the papers, helped him pack, even called him a car to take him to Sophie's apartment. Why go through this elaborate, cruel theater? The plane began its descent. Iris looked out the window. Miami glittered below, a scatter of gold dust on black velvet. She'd been here once before, with Julian, back when they were still new. He'd taken her to see the ocean. "I love the ocean," he'd said. Asterisk, "Do you want to live by the water someday?" Asterisk, she'd asked. He'd thought about it. Asterisk, "If you do." Asterisk. She realized now that "if you do" had probably meant nothing. All his tenderness was disposable. The navy suit. The champagne roses. The jacket he'd pulled from the hook. None of it had meant anything. The plane touched down, taxied, stopped. Iris switched her phone off airplane mode. Messages flooded in, a cascade of notifications she swiped away without reading. She opened Gabriel's reply. Asterisk, "Dad wants to discuss the alliance in person. Are you serious about this?" Asterisk. She typed back, "Yes." Then she opened Julian's messages. 28 missed calls. 15 messages. The last one had come 3 minutes ago. "Iris, where are you?" She didn't reply. She didn't block him, either. She tapped his profile picture. His most recent post was from 3 days ago, a photo of an airplane wing, captioned "business trip." She'd liked it at the time, asked when he'd be back. He'd replied, "This weekend." The flight in that photo hadn't been bound for Shanghai. She should have noticed. The electronic boarding passes he never forwarded. The confirmation emails he forgot to share. All the times he'd said, "Don't worry about the work stuff," and she'd chosen to accept it. Suspicion was exhausting. Trust was easier. The gate agent announced final deplaning. Iris stood, folded the blanket, and grabbed her purse. The flight attendant smiled at her. "Have a good evening, ma'am." Iris smiled back. Outside the terminal, the Miami night hit her. Warm, salt-laced, nothing like the dry Beijing cold she'd left behind. She stood in the taxi queue in her evening gown with only a thin wrap, shivering slightly despite the heat. Her phone vibrated. Not a message. A call. The screen lit up with a name she'd seen 1,000 times. Julian Whitmore. Iris looked at it for a long moment. The wind lifted her hair, strands catching at the corner of her mouth. She tasted salt. Couldn't tell if it was the ocean or something else. She answered. "Iris." Julian's voice was ragged, almost distorted with urgency. "Where are you?" "Miami," she said. "Miami?" He sounded thrown. "Why Miami?" "To see the ocean." Silence on the line. She could hear his breathing, fast and uneven, like he'd been running. She pictured him still in his wedding suit, tie loosened, the top buttons of his shirt undone. "Did you?" His voice turned rough. "Do you know where I was today?" Iris didn't answer. He stopped for a long moment, as if the next words cost him something. I was on a business trip. In Shanghai. The project's finished. I'll buy a ticket.
I'll come get you.
Okay, she said. She hung up. She didn't get in the taxi line. She sat down on the concrete steps outside the terminal, her gown pooling around her on the dirty ground. The satin picked up dust. She didn't care. Her phone lit up again. Another text from an unknown number.
Just a photo this time.
It had been taken from somewhere in the ballroom, an awkward angle, focus slightly soft. But the image was clear enough. Julian and Sophie on stage, face-to-face kissing. In the bottom corner of the frame, a woman in a champagne dress was turning away, her back to the camera. The woman looked exactly like a spectator. Below the photo, a line of text. Yanbai Fong asked me to tell you. His offer still stands. Iris stared at the words. Offer? He'd said he would do her a favor. She'd asked him to pass a message to Julian. That wasn't an offer. That was a request. Unless the favor he'd been offering wasn't about delivering a message at all. She called the number. It was picked up instantly. The voice on the other end wasn't Yanbai Fong's. It was a woman's voice, young, with an odd mechanical flatness, a voice modulator. Mrs. Whitmore. You work for Yanbai Fong.
Ido.
The woman's tone was unreadable through the distortion. Mr. Fong wanted me to tell you. If you've made your decision, you can contact him at any time. But before that, he has one question for you. What question? 3 years ago, when you were in a coma after your surgery, do you really believe it was Julian Whitmore who sat at your bedside the whole time? Iris's hand tightened around the phone.
Surgery.
3 years ago. Coma. It had been their second month of marriage. Right after the honeymoon, she'd collapsed with abdominal pain. Acute appendicitis with a perforation. Emergency surgery. The procedure itself went fine, but she developed a severe post-operative infection. Fever spiked. She'd been unconscious for 3 days. When she woke up, Julian had been sitting beside her bed, eyes bloodshot, unshaven, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He hadn't said anything. He'd just taken her hand and held it. She'd thought in that moment, this man. This is the one. Now someone was telling her it hadn't been him. What are you saying? Her voice came out tighter than she intended. I'm saying, the mechanical voice replied, that Julian Whitmore scheduled another surgery for the same day. He wasn't with you during those 3 days. He was with someone else. The line went dead. Iris sat on the cold airport steps, the dead phone pressed to her ear, the Miami wind whipping her gown around her legs. She'd thought the worst pain tonight was watching her husband marry another woman. But this was worse. This was the slow, nauseating realization that every moment she'd held sacred, every memory she'd wrapped around herself like a blanket on cold nights, might have been a lie from the very beginning. Julian found her on the 3rd day. She was walking out of the elevator at her hotel when she saw him cross the lobby. She was wearing a plain white t-shirt and jeans, hair pulled back, no makeup, dark circles under her eyes from 3 nights of fractured sleep. He didn't look much better. His shirt was wrinkled, his jaw rough with stubble, his eyes webbed with broken capillaries. He stopped when he saw her, as if some invisible barrier had caught him mid-stride. Then he was moving again, fast, closing the distance between them. Iris. She stood still, watched him approach, watched his hand lift, hesitate, drop back to his side, watched his mouth open and close without producing sound. 3 years of marriage. She'd never seen him look this wrecked. Let's go upstairs, she said, and turned back toward the elevator. He followed her inside. The doors sealed them into a small, silent box. She pressed 12. The numbers ticked upward, each floor an eternity. You, Julian's voice scraped out of him. You know, don't you? It wasn't a question. The wedding. You already knew. It doesn't matter. Her tone was flat. How did you find out I was in Miami? He blinked, thrown. He'd clearly expected her to demand explanations about Sophie, to cry, to rage, to make him account for himself. She'd done none of it. "I tracked your flight," he said.
Right.
"Did you also track when I'm flying back to New York? You're coming back?" His voice sharpened.
When? I'll take you.
The elevator opened. She walked out without answering, swiped her key card, pushed the door open. She didn't close it behind her. Julian stood in the doorway for 2 beats, then stepped inside. The room was standard: a queen bed, a desk, a window overlooking a gray-blue slice of the Atlantic. On the nightstand, a book lay open, spine up. On the windowsill, a cold cup of tea. The curtains were half-drawn. Julian scanned the room. "You're alone? Is there supposed to be someone else?" "That's not what I meant." He exhaled. "Iris, we need to talk." She settled into the chair by the window, pulling her knees up under her. The posture made her look smaller, more guarded, a hedgehog curled inward, soft parts hidden, quills facing out.
Fine.
"Talk." He stood in the middle of the room like a defendant waiting for a sentence. The silence stretched until the light outside shifted from gray to deep blue. "Sophie and I," he stopped. Started again. "I knew her before I met you." Iris's fingers curled against her shins.
She didn't speak.
7 years ago. A friend's party. I'd just started my company. She'd just graduated. We were together for a while. Then things happened. We split up.
A pause.
After the split, I met you. So, when you were with me, you were still thinking about her. He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, then shut it. His shoulders dropped.
I'm sorry.
"I'm sorry." 2 words that somehow made everything worse. Iris looked at his face, the face she'd woken up next to for 3 years. She tried to summon every memory attached to it. Their first meeting at a coffee shop, him frowning at his laptop. Their first date, him pulling out her chair. The proposal, him down on one knee with trembling hands. Had Sophie been there in the background of every one of those moments? "When did you start seeing her again?" she asked. 2 years ago. She'd gotten divorced. We ran into each other at an industry event. 2 years. Iris did the math silently. That was right around their first wedding anniversary. He'd bought her an expensive necklace. He told her that year had been the happiest of his life. The happiest year of his life. The same year he'd reconnected with another woman. "So for 2 years you've been..." She couldn't bring herself to use the word cheating. It was accurate, but saying it out loud would make it too real. "You've been going back and forth between us." Julian didn't answer. His silence was its own confession. "What about the wedding?" she pressed. "Does Sophie know you're already married? Or does she know and just not care?" "She doesn't know." Julian lifted his head, and there was something in his eyes Iris couldn't read. "She doesn't know I was ever married." Iris went still. "You never told her?"
No.
"Then what was your plan?" Her voice cracked, finally, the first fissure in her composure. "Were you going to hide it forever? Divorce me first, then get a license with her? And if that was the plan, why not just tell me? Why the elaborate?" She stopped. Because she'd just understood. He wasn't planning to divorce her at all. And he wasn't planning to legally marry Sophie. He wanted both of them in their assigned places, one as the legal wife, one as the emotional partner. He wanted to have everything. "Iris." Julian crouched in front of her chair, tilting his face up toward hers. His eyes were rimmed red. "I know I've hurt you. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you, please don't do anything reckless." "Reckless like what?" "Like disappearing without a word. The night you turned off your phone, I thought something had happened to you. I called everyone, even your brother. Gabriel told me nothing. Just said to stop looking." Iris looked down at the man crouched before her. His expression held worry, guilt, a complicated mix of fear, and something that looked almost like love. From the outside, a stranger might think he was a man who'd made a terrible mistake and was desperate to make it right. But she wasn't a stranger. She was the one he'd betrayed. "Julian," she said quietly, "did you ever love me?" His whole body went rigid. It was such a simple question, and so impossible to answer. If he said yes, then how could he have done what he'd done? If he said no, then what had the last 5 years been? His mouth moved. All that came out was, "Come home." Iris looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, a small, pale smile that flickered at the corners of her mouth and vanished, leaving no trace behind. Julian saw it and went very still. The Iris he knew was gone. Someone else was sitting in that chair now, someone he didn't recognize at all. "Okay," she said. "Let's go home." They didn't talk after that. She packed her bag, checked out of the hotel, and sat beside him on the flight back to New York. They barely exchanged a dozen words. Every time Julian tried to speak, her silence shut him down. They landed at JFK just past 8 in the evening. Outside the terminal, a black Maybach idled at the curb. A driver in a dark suit stepped out and walked toward her. "Miss Sterling. Mr. Sterling sent me." Iris nodded and turned to Julian. He was staring at the car. His expression was complicated. He knew the Sterling family had money. She told him early on. Her father, Michael Sterling, ran Sterling Group. Her brother, Gabriel, was executive vice president. But in 3 years of marriage, Iris had never used a cent of family resources. She drove a modest sedan she'd bought herself. They lived in a condo he'd purchased. She showed up to family holidays with normal gifts. He'd assumed she was the kind of woman who didn't like relying on family. It hadn't occurred to him that maybe she just hadn't needed to. "I'll take you," he said. "No need. I'm going to my family's house. You should go home." Home. She meant the Sterling estate, not the condo they shared. Julian watched her climb into the Maybach. The door closed. The car pulled away, its taillights dissolving into the dark. He stood on the curb for a long time, feeling something slip through his fingers, something he didn't have the right to hold on to. The Sterling estate sat on 10 acres in Westchester County. Iris had grown up there, moved out at 18, and returned at 28 under circumstances she'd never imagined. The iron gates swung open as the Maybach approached, revealing a long driveway lined with old oaks. Gabriel was waiting at the front door. He stood in a gray cashmere sweater, holding a half-empty cup of coffee, his silhouette sharp against the warm light spilling from the house. He was 8 years older than Iris, with the same dark hair and angular jaw, but his features were harder, his presence more imposing. The Sterling children had divided their parents' traits neatly between them. Gabriel their father's business instincts, Iris their mother's quiet reserve. "Iris." He pulled her door open and gave her a quick, assessing look. "You've lost weight. It's been 3 days. That's not how weight loss works." He took her bag and handed her a manila envelope. "Dad wants you to read this first." She opened it as they walked inside. Inside was a photocopy of an equity transfer agreement. Sterling Group's hospitality division was negotiating a joint venture with Fong Properties to develop a coastal resort project. The core terms were straightforward. Sterling would transfer a 15% stake in a subsidiary. Fong would match with equivalent land assets. It was a business deal, not a marriage contract. "The Fong family isn't asking for this," Iris said. "Dad's position is that the alliance and the business are separate matters." Gabriel set his coffee cup on the entryway table. "Dominic Fong wanting to marry you is a private matter. Sterling Group partnering with Fong Properties is a corporate one. They don't mix." "Dominic Fong?" Iris caught the name. "Yanbai Fong." Gabriel gave her a sharp look. "You've met him." She didn't answer that. "When did he make the proposal?" 3 months ago." Gabriel studied her face. "Does Dad know about Julian?"
No.
"But it doesn't matter now." Gabriel followed her into the living room. He was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure about this? A marriage alliance isn't a game. Dominic Fong, people in the industry call him the wind waiter." "What does that mean?" "It means he waits.
For opponents to make mistakes.
For markets to shift. For every condition to align perfectly. Then he strikes." He paused. "Someone like that, you can't outplay him." Iris stopped walking and turned to face her brother. Gabriel. I don't need to outplay him. I just need him to help me win. Gabriel stared at her for a beat. Then his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like the complicated pride of watching someone you've protected for decades finally stand up without you. Okay, he said. Dad's in the study. Michael Sterling sat behind a mahogany desk, a laptop open in front of him, several printed reports spread to his right. At 57, his hair was more salt than pepper, but his eyes were as sharp as ever, the kind of eyes that assessed everything they looked at like a potential asset or a liability. Dad. He glanced up briefly, his gaze scanning her face, then returned to his screen. His voice was measured. Dominic Fong. Your impression?
The fae met once.
I don't know him well. And you're willing to marry someone you don't know? Not knowing him is exactly why I'm willing. She sat down across from him. The people I thought I knew, I didn't really know at all. The words were loaded with implication. Michael Sterling heard it. He didn't touch it. He was a man who believed in letting things settle before making judgments. Fong's terms are that after the marriage, you'll join Fong Properties board as Sterling Group's representative, with oversight authority on the joint venture. He rotated his laptop to face her. The screen showed a personnel file. This is the man you'll need to win over first. The photo was of a man in his early 30s, neatly groomed, with a warm, approachable smile. The name read *Ethan Liu, VP, Fong Properties. Head of Hospitality Division, Yanbai Fong's right hand, Michael said. If you want to navigate Fong Properties, he's your first gate. Iris memorized the face. I'm not going to pressure you about the marriage, Michael continued. But there's something you need to know. What? 3 years ago, when you were hospitalized for your appendectomy, his voice shifted, losing its businesslike neutrality and becoming something quieter, more paternal. Someone called the hospital 10 times to ask about your condition. It wasn't your husband. Iris's chest tightened. It was a man. He asked very specific questions, what your fever was, whether the infection markers were dropping, if you needed to be transferred to a different facility. I assumed he was a friend of yours. When I asked, you said you didn't know who he was. So I let it go. The study was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the wall. Dad. Iris's voice came out strained. Do you still have the number he called from? Michael pulled open a drawer and took out an old phone. He scrolled through it for a long moment, then held it out to her. The screenshot showed a call log. One number, repeated 10 times. It was the same number that had sent her the text message at the wedding. That's not Dominic Fong, Iris said. Her hand was trembling. That's his older brother, Yanbai. Michael Sterling's eyebrows drew together. Outside, the sound of a car engine approached. Iris walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. A dark gray Porsche had pulled up in front of the house. The driver's door opened, and a man in a black overcoat stepped out, tall, lean, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who belonged everywhere he went. Yanbai Fong looked up and met her eyes through the second-floor window. He smiled. It was the same smile he'd worn at the wedding, half amused, deeply knowing, the smile of a predator who'd just watched his prey walk willingly into the trap. And Iris understood, with sudden, crystalline clarity, that from the moment she'd turned her back on that wedding, she'd been in his sights. Julian and Sophie's ceremony hadn't just been a betrayal. It had been bait, and she'd taken it. Yanbai was shown into the living room while Iris came down the stairs. She'd changed into a dark blue house dress. Her hair was down. She'd touched up her makeup, not out of vanity, but because she refused to look defeated in front of anyone, especially him. He stood by the French windows, his overcoat draped over his arm, studying a painting on the wall. It was a replica of Monet's water lilies, her mother's favorite. The brushwork was unremarkable, but the painting had history. Her mother had bought it when Iris was 3. Iris had refused to let go of the frame, so the gallery owner had given it to them. Your mother had good taste. Yanbai said without turning around. It's not an original, but it has more story than most originals do. Iris sat down on the couch and didn't respond. He didn't seem bothered. He settled into the armchair across from her, folding his coat over the armrest. Tonight, he was wearing a thin black sweater, sleeves pushed up to his elbows, exposing lean forearms. On his wrist was an old mechanical watch, the face slightly scuffed, clearly worn for years. "Why are you here?" she asked. "To see you. You vanished from the wedding. I was concerned." "Concerned about what?" "That you were too calm." He met her eyes. A woman who discovers her husband is marrying someone else and stays that composed, that means one of two things. Either she doesn't love him at all, or she's planning something much bigger. Iris picked up her teacup and took a sip. She didn't confirm or deny. "You told me you were going on a long trip," Yanbai said. 3 days is not long." "I changed my mind." "Because Julian came after you." Her gaze lifted, sharp. He read the suspicion in her expression and shook his head slightly. "I didn't have you followed. I just know Julian. He wouldn't let you sit alone for long. You seem to know him well. He's my brother." The word landed with no emotion, like a statement of geography. Even if he wishes he weren't. Iris set her cup down and leaned forward slightly, shifting into negotiation posture. "You asked me to do you a favor. I did it. Now I'm asking you to return it. Name it. Tell me what happened 3 years ago." The room went still. Yanbai's fingers tapped once, twice on the armrest. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark lawn. The old oaks were swaying in the wind, their shadows shifting across the grass. 3 years ago, he said, you had an appendectomy right after your honeymoon. The surgery was routine, but you developed a post-op infection. High fever. You were moved to the ICU. That night, Julian signed a critical condition notice. Iris's hands curled into fists. She didn't remember this. She didn't remember signing anything or being told about it. She'd been too feverish, too far under. When she woke, all she remembered was Julian beside her bed, holding her hand. And then you were unconscious for 3 days. Yanbai turned, his face shadowed by the window light behind him. During those 3 days, Julian came to see you once a day. Each visit lasted less than half an hour. He wasn't with you at night. He was outside a different operating room. Iris felt her blood go cold. "Sophie," she said. Sophie had been in a car accident that same night. Ruptured spleen. Emergency surgery. She didn't have family nearby. Julian signed her surgical consent form. He stayed outside her operating room all night. He didn't leave until she was out of danger the next morning.
She remembered now.
The day after she'd been discharged, Julian had looked exhausted. She'd assumed it was from taking care of her. She'd had the housekeeper make him soup. He'd kept checking his phone while he ate it. She'd thought it was work. "You're certain?" she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I have proof." Yanbai pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and set it on the coffee table between them. Sophie's surgical consent form. Julian signed it. And surveillance stills from the hospital elevator. He went back and forth between the 8th and 10th floors every night. You were in the ICU on 10. Sophie was in a private room on 8. Iris didn't touch the envelope. She stared at it like it was a bomb. "Why do you have this?" "Because I was at that hospital too. My mother was having heart surgery. I ran into him in the elevator several times. He didn't recognize me, but I recognized him." A pause. "He looks like me." Iris looked up at his face. Now that she was really looking, she could see it. The same brow structure, the same line of the nose, the same angle of the jaw. Even the way the corner of his mouth curved was identical. But Julian's eyes had a warmth to them, or what she'd always interpreted as warmth. Yanbai's eyes held nothing. They were still water, depthless, unreadable. "Why didn't you tell me then?" she asked. "Why would I?" His tone wasn't cruel, just honest. "You were Julian's wife. You didn't know me. If I'd told you, you wouldn't have believed me. You would have thought I was trying to cause trouble. He was right. Iris closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Then she reached for the envelope and pulled out the documents. The surgical consent form was unmistakably Julian's handwriting. She knew the way he shaped his letters. He'd once told her he'd practiced writing her name because the strokes were complicated and he wanted to get it right. The patient name on the form was Sophie Lynn. Under relationship to patient, he'd written friend. Friend. He'd shuttle between his girlfriend's operating room and his wife's ICU, doling out comfort to both of them like a man balancing two accounts. Sophie got an entire night of vigil. Iris got 30-minute visits and a carefully constructed lie about devotion. She put the papers back in the envelope. What do you want? She looked at him directly. You've spent 3 years collecting evidence. You showed up at his wedding. You made sure I saw it all. This isn't just about exposing Julian. What do you want? Yanbai smiled. It was different from the smiles he'd given her before. Those had been calculated, controlled, the measured expressions of a man who always knew his next move. This one had something else beneath it, a flicker of recognition, maybe even respect, at being seen through. You're perceptive, he said. I asked you a question. I want you. He said it the way someone might say, I want coffee. No emphasis. No drama. Just a simple statement of fact. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 9. Iris stared at him, searching for the joke, the tell, the crack in his composure that would reveal this as manipulation. She found nothing. You've known me for 3 days, she said. I've known you for 3 years. Since the moment you woke up in that hospital and asked your brother if Julian had been with you the whole time. Iris froze. Gabriel was outside the ICU when I walked past. He was on the phone, upset. I overheard your name. Later, after you woke up, he took a call and I heard him say, *, she's asking if Julian stayed with her. What should I tell her? *. Yanbai sat back down, his movements slow and deliberate, like someone settling in to tell a long story. I remember thinking, this woman just survived a coma and the first thing she asks about is whether her husband was there. She must love him very much. And the man she loves that much must be very lucky. But he wasn't, Iris finished.
No.
He wasn't. Yanbai looked at her with an intensity that made the air feel thinner. So I waited. For you to discover yourself. For you to decide to leave. 3 years. 3 years. It was absurd. In 28 years of living, Iris thought she'd seen every variation of human absurdity. But a man spending 3 years collecting proof of her husband's infidelity, waiting for the exact moment of her maximum devastation, then appearing beside her with an offer of marriage, that wasn't romance. That was obsession. That wasn't devotion. That was calculation. What makes you think I'd agree? She stood, looking down at him. Because you knew about Julian before I did? Because you have leverage over him? Because you showed up when I was at my lowest with a hand outstretched, and I'm supposed to grab it out of gratitude. Yanbai rose to his feet. He was a head taller than her. When she had to tilt her chin up to meet his gaze, he anticipated it and angled his head down first, bringing his eyes level with hers. No, he said, voice low. I never assumed you'd say yes. She frowned. I told you. I wait. He straightened, reaching for his coat. I'm waiting for you to need me. For you to come to me and say you need my help. The way you already did once tonight. He walked toward the front door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. Iris, you're not someone who can be won by a man waiting 3 years. You're someone who will only choose a man because you need what he can offer and no one else can give it to you. So tell me. She crossed her arms. What can you offer me? He pulled the door open. The night wind swept in, lifting the hem of his coat. An identity, he said. One that will make Julian Whitmore regret every choice he's ever made. One that will make Sophie Lynn spend the rest of her life looking up. One that will make everyone who ever underestimated you understand exactly who they were dealing with. The door clicked shut. The dark shape of his coat disappeared past the window. The Porsche's engine turned over, and the sound of it faded into the night. Iris stood in the entryway, listening to the silence he left behind. When she walked back into the living room, Gabriel was sitting on the couch. "You heard all of that," she said. "I did." He was holding a glass of whiskey. Yanbai is not a simple man. Gabriel. 3 years ago, when you ran into him at the hospital, why didn't you tell me? Gabriel swirled the whiskey, watching the ice melt. He took his time answering. Because back then I also thought he wanted something from you. You just had surgery. You were still recovering. I didn't want to add to your burden. And now. He looked at his sister, his gaze weighted with something complicated. Now you know. So the choice is yours. Iris walked to her mother's Monet replica and touched the edge of the frame. The wood was chipped in places, the paint worn down to the base layer. Time had stripped away the surface, the way it always did with secrets. If what he says is true, Iris said, Julian spent that whole night outside Sophie's operating room. I got 30 minutes a day. Our marriage was a lie from the first month. Iris. I'm not grieving. She turned around. Her expression was unnervingly calm. I'm doing the math. Yanbai doesn't want me because he cares about me. He wants me because he wants to beat Julian. Everything Julian ever had, he intends to take, including his wife. And right now, I need someone who can help me destroy Julian, help me stand on my own inside Sterling Group, and turn me from the woman everyone pities into the woman everyone has to answer to. Mutual use, Gabriel said. Exactly. Gabriel studied her for a long moment. Behind her composure, something was burning. Something he hadn't seen in her before. It wasn't hate. It wasn't grief. It was the cold, clear fire of someone who had been broken and had decided on the way down exactly how she was going to rebuild. You're sure? He asked one last time. I'm sure. Iris pulled out her phone and dialed Yanbai-Fong's number. He picked up on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. Yanbai, your offer. I accept. A pause. Then a quiet exhale, not quite a laugh, but something close. Satisfaction. Relief. And underneath both, something she still couldn't name. Then, as of now, he said, You're my fiancé. She hung up and watched her phone's screen fade to black. Outside, the moon was hidden behind clouds. The old oaks stood in darkness, their branches stirring in the wind. In the distance, the city sprawled in its endless grid of light, millions of people living their ordinary lives, unaware that hers had just veered permanently off its tracks. She sat back down and opened the message from the unknown number, the one that had arrived at the wedding. Asterisk Mrs. Whitmore, your husband is getting married today. At the Ritz-Carlton. To someone else, asterisk. It was still there, still sharp, still waiting to go off. And then she thought of something she'd never let herself think about before. The apple. When she'd woken up in the ICU, there had been an apple on her nightstand. Half peeled. The exposed flesh had already browned. She'd assumed Julian had been peeling it for her, but Julian didn't like apples. She'd asked, asterisk, who peeled this? Asterisk. Julian had paused. Asterisk, a nurse. Asterisk. A nurse who peeled half an apple, then wandered off and left it there. The explanation had sounded reasonable at the time. Now, with everything else stripped away, it sounded like every other lie he'd ever told her. If Julian hadn't been at her bedside, then who had? Who had fed her water? Who had wiped her face? Who had started peeling an apple and never finished it? Iris closed her eyes. The world had been happening around her for years. Things she hadn't seen. Things she hadn't known. Things that had been deliberately hidden. And she was only just beginning to understand how much.